everyone, welcome back. I know many of you put these videos on to relax or fall asleep. So before you drift off tonight, take a moment to leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I really enjoy seeing how.
That night, the air turned unnaturally cold, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to unfold. I have been a ranger at Black Hollow National Forest for 23 years, and in all that time, I believed I had seen everything these woods could offer. I was wrong, dead wrong. What happened in the autumn of 1987 changed everything I thought I knew about this place, about nature, and about the thin line between the world we see and the darkness that lurks just beyond our understanding. My name is Earl Whitmore, and this is my account of the events that took place in those cursed weeks, events that the official reports never fully captured, events that still wake me in the dead of night, drenched in cold sweat, listening for sounds that should not exist. Black Hollow National Forest spans over 40,000 acres of dense, ancient woodland in the remote corners of the Pacific Northwest. The trees here are old, older than this nation, older than memory itself. Douglas firs stretch toward the sky like the pillars of some forgotten cathedral, their branches so thick and intertwined that sunlight rarely touches the forest floor. Beneath their canopy lies a world of perpetual twilight, where moss covers everything in a carpet of green so deep it seems almost black, where fallen logs rot slowly over centuries, and where the silence can become so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat pounding in your ears. The locals have always known there was something different about Black Hollow. The indigenous peoples who lived here long before European settlers arrived had names for this place, names that roughly translated to the forest that swallows or the woods of no return. They avoided these lands whenever possible, and their stories spoke of things that walked between the trees, things that were neither animal nor spirit, things that hungered for human flesh and human fear. I first came to Black Hollow in the spring of 1964. A young man fresh out of the forestry program at Oregon State, eager to make my mark and filled with the kind of naive confidence that only youth can provide. The head ranger at the time was a grizzled old veteran named Chester Holbrook, a man who had spent 40 years in these woods and whose weathered face told stories his mouth never would. On my first day, Chester took me to the edge of a particularly dense section of forest known locally as the Maw, a name that should have been my first warning. He pointed into the impenetrable darkness between the trees and told me in a voice as dry as autumn leaves that there were places in Black Hollow where a man should never go alone, places where the forest had a way of keeping what it took. I laughed at the time, dismissing his words as the superstitions of an old man who had spent too many years in isolation. Chester did not laugh. He simply looked at me with those pale blue eyes, eyes that had seen too much, and told me that I would learn. Everyone learns eventually, he said, though some learn too late. The years passed, and I settled into the rhythm of life at Black Hollow. I married a woman named Dorothy from the nearby town of Millbrook, a kind soul with auburn hair and a smile that could light up even the darkest winter night. We had 2 children, a boy named William and a girl named Margaret, and for a time, life was good. I patrolled the trails, maintained the fire lookouts, assisted lost hikers, and gradually came to know every ridge and valley, every stream and clearing within my assigned territory. But I also came to know the forest's darker side. I learned which areas the animals avoided, where the birds fell silent for no apparent reason, where the compass needles would spin wildly as if confused by some unseen force. I learned to trust the instincts that told me when something was wrong, when the woods themselves seemed to hold their breath in anticipation of something terrible. And I learned never to enter the Maw alone, never to stray from the marked trails after sunset, and never, ever to answer if I heard someone calling my name from deep within the trees. The autumn of 1987 began like any other. The leaves turned their brilliant shades of gold and crimson, painting the forest in colors so beautiful they seemed almost unreal. Hikers came in greater numbers, eager to witness the spectacle before winter sealed the trails in ice and snow. Everything appeared normal, peaceful even, but I should have known better. The animals knew something was wrong long before we did. The deer that usually grazed near the ranger station disappeared entirely, fleeing to lower elevations weeks earlier than usual. The birds grew quiet, their morning songs replaced by an oppressive silence that hung over the forest like a burial shroud. And the dogs at the station, 3 German shepherds named Buck, Ranger, and Scout, who had patrolled these woods fearlessly for years, began refusing to go beyond the station boundaries, whimpering and cowering whenever we tried to take them on patrol. The first disappearance occurred on October 3rd. A hiker named Harold Jennings, a retired schoolteacher from Portland, had set out alone on the Ridgeback Trail, a moderate 8-mile loop that wound through some of the forest's most scenic areas. Harold was an experienced outdoorsman, a man who had hiked trails far more challenging than anything Black Hollow had to offer. He had signed in at the trailhead at 7 in the morning, noting his expected return time as 2 in the afternoon. When he had not returned by nightfall, his wife Edna called the station in a panic. I organized a search party immediately, gathering every available ranger and volunteer from the surrounding communities. We combed the Ridgeback Trail from end to end, calling Harold's name into the darkening woods, our flashlight beams cutting weak paths through the gathering darkness. We found nothing. No sign of Harold, no indication that anything had gone wrong. His footprints simply ended in the middle of the trail, approximately 4 miles from the trailhead, as if he had been plucked from the earth by some invisible hand. The ground around the spot where his tracks disappeared showed no signs of struggle, no evidence of animal attack. Nothing that could explain how a grown man could simply vanish into thin air. I remember standing at that spot as the other searchers spread out through the surrounding forest, calling Harold's name with increasing desperation. The silence was absolute, so complete that it seemed to press against my eardrums like a physical weight. Then I heard it, a sound so faint that I initially dismissed it as my imagination. A creak, like old wood bending under pressure, coming from somewhere deep in the forest. It was rhythmic, almost like breathing, and as I listened, I realized it was getting closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and every instinct screamed at me to run. Instead, I raised my flashlight and pointed it toward the source of the sound. The beam illuminated nothing but trees and darkness, but I could feel something there, just beyond the reach of the light, watching me with what felt like ancient, hungry patience. One of the other rangers called my name, breaking the spell, and when I looked back toward the sound, there was nothing but silence. We searched for Harold Jennings for 3 days. We brought in tracking dogs from the county sheriff's department, helicopters with thermal imaging equipment, and nearly 200 volunteers who scoured every inch of the Ridgeback Trail and the surrounding wilderness. We found nothing. No body, no clothing, no equipment, not a single trace of Harold Jennings beyond those footprints that ended so abruptly in the middle of the trail. The official report listed him as missing, presumed dead, victim of unknown circumstances. His wife Edna never accepted that conclusion. She came to the station every week for months afterward, begging us to keep searching, insisting that her husband was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. I could never bring myself to tell her about the footprints, about how they had simply stopped as if Harold had stepped out of existence. Some truths are too terrible to share. The second disappearance occurred 2 weeks later, and this time, there were witnesses. A group of 4 hikers from Seattle, 2 married couples named Walter and Mildred Patterson and Eugene and Virginia Cooper, had set out on the Cascade Loop Trail, a challenging 16-mile route that passed through some of the most remote sections of Black Hollow. They were experienced hikers, well-equipped and well-prepared, and they had planned to complete the loop over 2 days, camping overnight at a designated site near Whispering Falls. According to the survivors, everything went smoothly until they reached the falls. They set up their tents, cooked dinner over a small campfire, and settled in for the night as the sun sank below the horizon and darkness claimed the forest. Walter Patterson was the first to notice something was wrong. He later told me, his voice trembling and his eyes haunted by memories he could not escape, that he had been awakened sometime around 2 in the morning by a sound he could not identify. It was like nothing he had ever heard before, he said, a kind of wet, clicking noise, like bones being snapped underwater. He lay in his tent, paralyzed by a fear he could not explain, listening as the sound grew closer. Then he heard Eugene scream. Walter scrambled out of his tent to find chaos. The campfire had died to embers, casting barely enough light to see by, but what he saw in that dim glow would haunt him for the rest of his life. Eugene Cooper was being dragged into the forest by something Walter could not clearly see. It moved with terrible speed, pulling Eugene across the ground as if he weighed nothing. And the sounds Eugene made, those desperate, gurgling screams, were cut short with a wet, tearing noise that Walter refused to describe in detail. Mildred and Virginia were screaming, and Walter grabbed them both, pulling them toward the trail, abandoning their equipment in their desperate flight. They ran through the darkness for hours, stumbling over roots and rocks until they finally reached the ranger station just before dawn. Virginia Cooper collapsed on the station steps, her eyes wide and unfocused, muttering words that made no sense. She never recovered. The trauma of that night broke something inside her, and she spent the rest of her life in a psychiatric facility, unable to speak of what she had witnessed without descending into hysteric screaming. I led the search party to Whispering Falls that same morning, armed with rifles and accompanied by every ranger in the district. What we found at the campsite defied explanation. The tents had been torn apart, not cut or opened, but ripped as if by tremendous force. Equipment was scattered across the clearing, some of it damaged beyond recognition. And the blood, there was so much blood, splattered across the rocks and soaked into the earth, more blood than a single human body could possibly contain. We followed the trail of blood into the forest, following it for nearly a quarter mile before it simply stopped. No body, no further evidence, just blood and then nothing. Eugene Cooper was never found. Like Harold Jennings before him, he had been swallowed by Black Hollow and never returned. The official investigation brought in experts from the state police and the Federal Wildlife Service. They examined the evidence, took samples of the blood, interviewed the survivors, and ultimately concluded that Eugene Cooper had been killed by a bear, probably a large black bear that had wandered into the campsite in search of food. The theory made no sense to anyone who had actually seen the campsite. Black bears do not drag their victims away with such speed and precision. Black bears do not leave behind so much blood without also leaving behind a body. And black bears do not make wet, clicking sounds like bones being snapped underwater. But the experts needed an explanation, something that fit within their understanding of the natural world, and a bear attack was the only theory that came close. I knew better. I had seen the claw marks on the trees near the campsite, marks that were too high off the ground to have been made by any bear, marks that showed long, thin fingers rather than the broad paws of an animal. I said nothing. Who would have believed me? The disappearances continued throughout October. A family of 4 from California vanished from the Pinecrest Trail, leaving behind nothing but their abandoned car in the parking lot. A group of college students on a camping trip went silent, their last radio transmission a garbled mess of screaming and static. A solitary photographer named Clarence Webb, who had come to capture the autumn colors on film, walked into the forest one morning and never returned. Each disappearance followed the same pattern, experienced outdoors people entering the forest and simply vanishing, leaving behind footprints that ended abruptly, equipment that showed signs of tremendous violence, and sometimes blood. So much blood, but never bodies. Never any bodies. I began spending more time in the forest, partly out of duty and partly out of a growing obsession to understand what was happening. I walked the trails at all hours, watching for patterns, looking for clues that the official investigators had missed. The other rangers thought I was losing my mind, and perhaps they were right. Dorothy begged me to transfer to another station, to leave Black Hollow behind before it claimed me too. I could not explain to her why I had to stay, why I felt compelled to face whatever darkness had taken root in these woods. Perhaps it was guilt over the lives I had failed to save. Perhaps it was the need to prove that I was not afraid, that 23 years in Black Hollow had not broken me as it had broken so many others. Or perhaps something in the forest was calling to me, drawing me deeper into its embrace with a siren song I could not resist. It was during one of these late-night patrols that I first saw it. I was walking the section of the Ridgeback Trail where Harold Jennings had disappeared, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness ahead of me, when I became aware of a presence watching me from the trees. The feeling was unmistakable, that prickling sensation on the back of your neck that tells you predator eyes are tracking your every movement. I stopped walking and slowly turned my flashlight toward the source of the feeling. At first, I saw nothing but the usual tangle of branches and shadows. Then the shadows moved. What I saw in that moment has haunted my dreams ever since. It stood between 2 massive Douglas firs, easily 12 feet tall, its body impossibly thin and elongated, like a human form that had been stretched on some hellish rack. Its skin, if it could be called skin, was the color of rotting bark, mottled gray and brown with patches of what looked like moss or lichen growing across its surface. Its arms hung past its knees, ending in hands with fingers that seemed too long, too jointed, like the legs of some enormous spider. But it was the face that truly terrified me. A face that was almost human, but wrong in every proportion, with eyes that were too large and too dark, reflecting my flashlight beam with a dull, hungry gleam, and a mouth that stretched far too wide, filled with teeth that looked like broken glass. For a long moment we simply stared at each other, the creature and I, predator and prey frozen in a tableau of mutual recognition. Then it smiled, that terrible mouth splitting even wider, and it spoke. I say spoke, but that is not quite accurate. The sound that emerged from its throat was more like the creak of bending wood, the rustle of dead leaves, the snap of breaking branches, all combined into something that approximated human speech. It said my name. Earl Whitmore, it creaked, in a voice that sounded like the forest itself was speaking. Earl Whitmore, we have been waiting for you. I ran. I am not ashamed to admit it. I turned and ran faster than I have ever run in my life, crashing through the underbrush without regard for the trail, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I fled. Behind me, I could hear it following, those creaking, clicking sounds getting closer with every passing second. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, cold and damp, smelling of rot and decay and something else. Something almost electrical, like the air before a lightning strike. I do not know how long I ran or how I found my way back to the station. My next clear memory is of Dorothy's face, pale with fear, as she found me collapsed on the front steps, my clothing torn, my hands bloody from pushing through thorny bushes, and my voice gone from screaming. I could not tell her what I had seen. The words would not come. I spent the next week in a state of shock, barely able to eat or sleep, jumping at every sound and seeing monsters in every shadow. The other rangers covered my patrols, and Dorothy watched over me with growing concern, urging me to see a doctor, to take leave, to get as far away from Black Hollow as possible. I could not leave. I knew that now, knew it with a certainty that defied logic. The creature had spoken my name. It had been waiting for me. Whatever was happening in Black Hollow, I was part of it somehow, connected to it in ways I did not understand. I began researching, digging through old records and historical archives, searching for any mention of similar phenomena in the forest's past. What I found chilled me to the bone. Black Hollow had a history of disappearances stretching back to the earliest days of European settlement in the region. In 1847, a group of 12 settlers attempting to establish a homestead in the area vanished without a trace, their cabins found empty with meals still sitting on the tables, as if the inhabitants had simply stood up and walked into the forest, never to return. In 1889, a logging camp of 32 men was abandoned overnight, the workers' belongings left behind, their tools still scattered around half-felled trees, but not a single body ever recovered. In 1923, a hunting party of 7 wealthy businessmen from Portland entered Black Hollow and disappeared, despite an extensive search that lasted 3 months. The pattern repeated every few decades, clusters of disappearances that defied explanation, followed by years of relative quiet. The indigenous people's stories began to make a terrible kind of sense. There was something in Black Hollow, something old and hungry, something that woke periodically to feed. I found references to the creature in several obscure texts, old journals and diaries from settlers and loggers who had encountered something in these woods and lived to tell about it. They called it by many names, the Hollow Walker, the Forest Fiend, the Hungry Dark, but their descriptions were remarkably consistent. Tall and thin, with bark-like skin and 2 long limbs, eyes that gleamed in the darkness, a mouth filled with teeth like broken glass, and always that creaking, clicking voice that spoke with the sounds of the forest itself. Some accounts suggested there was only one creature, an ancient thing that had lived in Black Hollow since before humanity existed. Others spoke of many creatures, a whole tribe of monsters that dwelt in the deepest, darkest parts of the forest, emerging only when their hunger grew too great to ignore. I did not know which account was true, and I was not certain I wanted to find out. The disappearances continued into November. The Forest Service closed Black Hollow to the public, citing safety concerns related to the ongoing investigation, but the closures did not stop the vanishings. A team of federal investigators sent to examine the evidence disappeared from their campsite near the maw, leaving behind overturned vehicles and splashes of blood but no bodies. A news crew from a Portland television station, determined to get footage of the closed forest for a story about the mysterious disappearances, never returned from their expedition. Even animals began to vanish. Deer and elk found in pieces scattered across the forest floor, their remains showing signs of violence that no natural predator could have inflicted. The body count mounted, though we had no bodies to count. Only absences, only silence where there should have been life. I knew I had to act. Whatever was happening in Black Hollow, whatever ancient evil had awakened in these woods, I could not simply wait for it to claim more victims. I began planning an expedition into the heart of the forest, into the maw itself, the place Chester Holbrook had warned me about so many years ago. If there were answers to be found, they would be there. in that impenetrable darkness where even the forest seemed afraid to grow. I did not tell Dorothy what I was planning. She would have tried to stop me, and I could not bear to see the fear in her eyes. I wrote letters to my children, letters to be opened only if I did not return, explaining what I had seen and what I suspected, begging them to leave this place and never look back. Then, on the night of November 15th, I packed my gear and walked into the darkness. The mall was everything the old stories had warned about and more. The trees grew so close together that I could barely squeeze between them, their branches interlocking overhead in a canopy so thick that my flashlight seemed to provide the only light in existence. The air was heavy and still, filled with a silence so profound that my own breathing sounded impossibly loud. I could feel the wrongness of this place pressing against me from all sides, a sense of ancient malevolence that made every instinct scream at me to turn back. I kept walking. I do not know how long I traveled through that twisted forest. Hours perhaps, or perhaps only minutes that stretched into eternity. Time seemed to move differently in the mall, flowing in strange patterns that defied measurement. Eventually I came to a clearing, though clearing is perhaps too generous a word for the space I found. It was more like a wound in the forest, a rough circle of bare earth where nothing grew, surrounded by trees that leaned away from the center as if repelled by some unseen force. In the middle of the clearing stood a structure. It was not a cabin, though it had perhaps been one once, long ago. Now it was more like a nest, a tangle of branches and bones and other things I did not want to examine too closely, woven together into a mound that rose nearly 20 feet from the forest floor. The smell emanating from the structure was indescribable, a mixture of rot and decay, and something else, something almost sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. I approached cautiously, my rifle raised, my flashlight beam playing across the surface of the mound. What I saw made my stomach heave. There were bodies in that structure, or what remained of bodies, human forms woven into the branches like grotesque decorations, their flesh gray and withered, their faces frozen in expressions of unimaginable terror. I recognized some of them. Harold Jennings, his kind face now twisted into a mask of horror. Eugene Cooper, or what was left of him, his body torn and broken but still somehow preserved. The federal investigators, the news crew, the family from California, the college students, all of them here, all of them part of this horrible monument to death. I heard the creaking before I saw them, that terrible, bone-snapping sound emerging from the darkness on all sides, growing louder with each passing second. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the shadows, and saw them emerging from the trees. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, tall and thin and wrong, their bark-like skin blending with the forest around them, their two large eyes reflecting the light with hungry gleams. They moved slowly, deliberately, surrounding me with the patient confidence of predators who know their prey has nowhere to run. The largest of them stepped forward, and I recognized it as the creature I had seen on the trail, the one that had spoken my name. It smiled that terrible broken glass smile and creaked its greeting. "Earl Whitmore," it said. "You have come to us at last. We knew you would. We have been calling you for so long." I do not remember deciding to fight. My body simply reacted, raising the rifle and firing into the approaching horde. The bullet struck the creatures with wet, thudding sounds, but they did not fall. They barely seemed to notice, continuing their slow advance as if the bullets were nothing more than minor inconveniences. I fired until my rifle was empty, then drew my sidearm and kept firing. It made no difference. The creatures were on me before I could reload, their long fingers wrapping around my arms and legs, lifting me off the ground with strength that should have been impossible for such thin limbs. The large one leaned in close, its face inches from mine, and I could see into those dark, depthless eyes, could see centuries of hunger and hatred and something else, something almost like loneliness. "We have waited so long for you," it creaked. "You are the watcher of this place, the keeper of our forest. You have seen us, spoken our name, and now you belong to us. You will join with us, become part of us, and through you, we will spread beyond these woods, beyond this place of confinement. You will help us feed." I do not know what gave me the strength to resist. Perhaps it was the thought of Dorothy, waiting for me at the station, unaware of the danger. Perhaps it was the faces of my children, William and Margaret, who deserved a father who would not give up. Or perhaps it was simply the stubbornness of a man who had spent 23 years in these woods and refused to let them claim him now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the one thing I had brought that was not a weapon, a silver lighter that had belonged to my father, passed down through generations of Whitmore men. I flicked it open and touched the flame to the nearest creature. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The creature burst into flames with a shriek that sounded like trees being torn apart in a hurricane, its bark-like skin igniting like dry kindling. The fire spread impossibly fast, jumping from creature to creature as if they were all connected, all part of the same terrible organism. The hands holding me loosened their grip as the creatures writhed and burned, and I fell to the ground, scrambling away from the inferno that was rapidly consuming everything around me. The large creature, the one that had spoken to me, was the last to burn. It stared at me through the flames, its expression one of mingled hatred and something almost like respect. "You think you have won?" it creaked, its voice distorting as the fire consumed its throat. "But we cannot be destroyed, Earl Whitmore. We are the forest, we are the hunger. We will sleep for a time, but we will wake again, and when we do, we will remember you." The flames took it then, reducing it to ash and embers, and the clearing fell silent. I barely remember the journey back through the maw. The fire had spread through the heart of the forest, consuming everything in its path, lighting my way with hellish illumination. I stumbled through the burning woods, choking on smoke and ash, my skin blistering from the heat, until I finally emerged onto a familiar trail and collapsed. The other rangers found me the next morning, barely alive, my clothes burned and my body covered in wounds I could not explain. They told me later that the fire had burned for 3 days, consuming nearly 1,000 acres of the maw before finally burning itself out. The official report attributed it to dry conditions and a careless camper's unattended fire, but I knew the truth. I had burned the heart of the darkness, destroyed the nest and the creatures that dwelt within it. But I had not destroyed them all. The large one's words echoed in my mind, a promise and a warning. "We will wake again, and when we do, we will remember you." I retired from the Forest Service 6 months later, claiming medical disability related to injuries sustained during the fire. Dorothy and I moved away from Black Hollow, settling in a small town in Arizona, where the desert sun seemed to banish the shadows that had haunted me for so long. William and Margaret grew up, married, had children of their own, and I watched from the sidelines as life continued, as the world turned, as the horrors of Black Hollow faded into memory. But I never forgot. I could not forget. Every autumn, when the leaves turned and the air grew cold, I felt the pull of the forest, heard the distant creaking of those terrible voices calling my name. I knew that someday I would have to return, would have to face the darkness one final time. The creatures had promised to remember me, and I suspected they were not the kind to forget. 30 years passed. Dorothy died in the winter of 2014, peacefully in her sleep, and something inside me died with her. The house in Arizona felt empty without her, the desert sun too bright, the silence too complete. I began having dreams about Black Hollow, vivid dreams of walking through that dark forest, of hearing those creaking voices calling to me from the shadows, of seeing that terrible nest with its cargo of the dead. The dreams came more frequently as the months passed, and I knew that the creatures were waking, knew that they were calling me back to finish what we had started so many years ago. In the autumn of 2017, I packed a bag, said goodbye to my children, and drove north. Black Hollow had changed in the decades since my departure. The fire had scarred the landscape, leaving behind vast stretches of blackened stumps and new growth that had not yet reached maturity. The ranger station where I had spent so many years had been rebuilt, staffed by young men and women who had no memory of the disappearances, no knowledge of the horrors that had once stalked these woods. They looked at me with curiosity when I arrived, this old man in his 80s who claimed to have been a ranger here long ago. I did not try to explain why I had come. How could I tell them that I had returned to face monsters they did not believe existed, to confront a darkness they could not imagine? I entered the forest alone, following trails that had grown unfamiliar with time, but still somehow felt like home. The maw had recovered from the fire, new trees growing where the old ones had burned, but something was different. The wrongness I had felt so strongly decades ago had diminished, replaced by a sense of waiting, of anticipation. The creatures were there. I could feel them watching me from the shadows, but they did not attack. They seemed to be biding their time, waiting for something. I made my way to the clearing where the nest had stood, now overgrown with young trees and thick underbrush. There was no sign of the structure, no trace of the bones and bodies that had been woven into its walls. But as I stood in that place, I heard the familiar creaking, felt the familiar presence surrounding me. The large creature emerged from the forest, unchanged by the passage of 30 years. It looked at me with those depthless eyes, and I saw recognition in their dark depths. "Earl Whitmore," it creaked, its voice unchanged. "You have returned to us. We knew you would. We have been waiting." I raised the lighter I had brought, the same silver lighter that had saved me decades ago, but I did not ignite it. Instead, I asked the question that had haunted me for 30 years. "What are you?" The creature tilted its head, that too wide mouth stretching into something that might have been a smile. "We are old," it said. "Older than your kind, older than the trees that shelter us. We were here before the first humans walked these lands, and we will be here long after the last of you has turned to dust. We are the hunger of the wild, the darkness that dwells in the heart of every forest. We are what your ancestors feared when they huddled around their fires, telling stories of monsters in the night. We are those monsters." I asked why they took people, why they killed and consumed and left nothing behind. The creature's expression shifted, becoming something almost wistful. "We must feed," it said simply. "The hunger is eternal, insatiable. But there is more to it than that. Each life we take becomes part of us, their memories, their fears, their dreams. Through them, we understand your kind, learn your ways, experience the world beyond this forest. We are collectors of souls, Earl Whitmore, and through the centuries we have amassed a collection beyond counting." I thought of Harold Jennings, of Eugene Cooper, of all the others who had vanished in these woods, their lives absorbed into this ancient, terrible collective. I felt a surge of anger and grief, but also something unexpected, pity. To exist for countless millennia with nothing but hunger and the absorbed memories of the dead, it seemed a lonely, miserable existence. The creature seemed to sense my thoughts. It stepped closer, and I did not retreat. "Do not pity us, Earl Whitmore," it creaked. "We do not suffer as you do. We simply are, as the forest is, as the darkness is. But you are different from the others we have taken. You burned us, hurt us in ways we had not been hurt for centuries. And yet here you are, returned to us in your final years, facing us without fear." I told it that I was not without fear, that I had simply learned to act despite my terror. The creature made a sound that might have been laughter. "That is what makes your kind so fascinating," it said. "You are fragile, fleeting creatures, your lives over in the blink of an eye. And yet you fight, you struggle, you rage against the darkness even when you know you cannot win. It is beautiful in its way." The conversation continued for hours, the creature and I standing in that clearing as the sun set and the forest grew dark around us. I learned things about Black Hollow that no human had ever known, secrets that stretched back to the dawn of time. The creatures were not demons or spirits, but something else entirely, a form of life that had evolved alongside our world, but remained forever apart from it. They were predators, yes, but they were also guardians of a sort, maintaining the balance of the forest in ways that human science could not comprehend. The disappearances, terrible as they were, served a purpose in the grand scheme of things, though that purpose remained beyond my understanding. As the night deepened, the creature made me an offer. "Join us," it said. "Not as prey, but as something else. You have lived your life, Earl Whitmore, loved and lost and suffered, as all your kind do. But there is more. There can be more. We can offer you eternity, a place among us, your memories and experiences preserved forever in the collective of our kind. You will never be forgotten, never fade into oblivion as your mortal shell decays. You will become part of the forest, part of us, and through us, you will live forever." I considered the offer. I will not pretend otherwise. The thought of eternal existence, of never truly dying, held a certain appeal, especially for an old man facing the end of his days. But I thought of Dorothy, waiting for me in whatever came after this life. I thought of my children and grandchildren, who would grieve my loss but eventually move on, carrying my memory with them into the future. I thought of the simple human pleasures I had enjoyed, the warmth of the sun, the taste of good food, the sound of laughter and music. These were things the creatures could never understand, trapped as they were in their eternal hunger. I refused. The creature nodded, as if it had expected my answer. "Then we will part as we met," it said, "as predator and prey, as hunter and hunted. But know this, Earl Whitmore, you will always have a place among us, should you change your mind. The forest remembers those who have walked its paths, and you have walked farther than most. I left Black Hollow that night, driving south as the first light of dawn painted the mountains gold and crimson. I knew I would never return, knew that whatever time I had left would be spent far from those dark woods and their ancient inhabitants. But I also knew that the creatures would continue, would keep feeding and collecting souls as they had for millennia. There was nothing I could do to stop them, no way to end their existence or prevent future disappearances. They were part of Black Hollow, as much as the trees and the mountains and the rivers. They would outlast us all. I am writing this account in the final months of my life. The doctors say the cancer has spread too far for treatment, and I have made my peace with that. My children and grandchildren gather around me, their faces lined with grief but also with love, and I find that I am not afraid of what comes next. I have lived a good life, a full life, and if there is something beyond this world, I hope to find Dorothy waiting for me there. But before I go, I wanted to leave this record, this warning to those who might someday find themselves in Black Hollow or places like it. The darkness is real. The monsters are real. They have always been real, lurking in the wild places of the world, waiting for those foolish or unlucky enough to wander into their domain. Most people will never encounter them, will live their entire lives without knowing how close they came to the edge of oblivion. But some will. Some will hear those creaking voices calling from the trees, will feel those hungry eyes watching from the shadows, will find themselves facing horrors beyond imagination. To those people, I offer what little wisdom I have gained. Do not go into the dark alone. Do not stray from the marked trails. Do not answer if you hear your name being called from deep within the forest, and if you find yourself facing the creatures, if you see those bark-like bodies and broken glass teeth, remember that they can be hurt, can be driven back, can be fought even if they cannot be destroyed. Fire is their weakness, their one vulnerability, and a lit match or a burning brand may be enough to save your life. But most importantly, remember that you are human, that your life, however brief, has meaning and value that the creatures can never truly understand. They may be eternal, but they are empty, hollow things that exist only to consume. We are more than that. We love and hope and dream. We create beauty and meaning from the chaos of existence. We are fragile and fleeting, yes, but that very fragility makes us precious, makes each moment of our lives something to be treasured. I do not know what will become of Black Hollow in the years to come. Perhaps the Forest Service will eventually close it permanently, recognizing the danger even if they do not understand its source. Perhaps some future generation will discover a way to truly destroy the creatures, to end their existence once and for all. Or perhaps they will continue as they have for millennia, feeding and collecting and waiting in the darkness for the next unwary traveler. Whatever happens, I hope this account will survive, will find its way to someone who needs to hear its message. The world is full of darkness, but it is also full of light. Hold on to that light, cherish it, and never let the shadows claim it. That is the best any of us can do. My name is Earl Whitmore. I was a ranger at Black Hollow National Forest for 23 years. I saw things in those woods that still haunt my dreams. And now, as I face my final days, I pass this knowledge on to you, whoever you are, wherever you might be. Be careful, be vigilant, and never, ever forget that the forest is watching, always watching, with hungry eyes and infinite patience. The creatures of Black Hollow are waiting. They will always be waiting. The night my story truly ended began much as the night my story truly began, with the air turning unnaturally cold and the forest holding its breath. I was alone in my room at the hospice facility, the machines monitoring my failing body humming softly in the darkness. The cancer had done its work, and I knew I had only days, perhaps hours, remaining. I had said my goodbyes to my children and grandchildren, had put my affairs in order, and was ready to face whatever came next. But as I lay there, drifting between wakefulness and sleep, I became aware of a presence in the room. The familiar creaking sound filled the air, soft at first but growing louder, and I opened my eyes to find the large creature standing at the foot of my bed. It should not have been there, should not have been able to exist so far from its forest home, but there it stood, as real and terrible as it had ever been. It smiled that broken glass smile and spoke my name one final time. Earl Whitmore. It creaked. The time has come. I asked if it had come to take me, to add my soul to its collection now that my body had failed. The creature shook its head, a gesture that looked almost human. No, it said. You made your choice, and we honor it. We have come to offer you something else, a gift, if you will accept it. I asked what gift a creature of darkness could possibly offer a dying man. The creature's expression shifted. becoming something I had never seen on its features before, something almost like compassion. Closure, it said. Understanding. The chance to see what waits beyond before you cross the threshold yourself. The creature touched my forehead with one of its long, cold fingers, and suddenly I was somewhere else. Somewhere beyond the hospice room and the machines and my failing body. I was in a place of light, pure and warm and welcoming, and I saw faces I recognized, faces of people I had loved and lost over the long years of my life. Dorothy was there, young and beautiful as she had been when we first met, her smile as radiant as I remembered. My parents were there, and my grandparents and friends who had passed on before me. They welcomed me with open arms, and I understood that this was not the end, but a beginning, a transition to something greater than I could have imagined. The creature's voice echoed in my mind. This is what waits for you, Earl Whitmore. This is what you chose when you refused our offer. You gave up eternity with us for this brief glimpse of light, and we want you to know that it was the right choice. Go now, join those who love you, and know that we will remember you. We'll speak your name in the darkness for as long as we exist. You were a worthy adversary, a rare human who saw us truly and did not break. That is something we respect, even honor. I returned to my body, to the hospice room and the machines and the pain that had become my constant companion. The creature was gone, if it had ever truly been there, but the vision remained, seared into my memory like a brand. I knew then that I was ready, truly ready, to let go. The darkness had shown me the light, and in doing so, had given me the peace I had sought for so long. I closed my eyes, took one final breath, and stepped forward into the warmth. This account was found among the personal effects of Earl Whitmore following his death on March 15, 2018. It was written in his own hand, in a notebook that showed signs of considerable age and wear. His family chose to make it public, honoring what they believed were his final wishes. Whether the events described within are true, the product of a dying mind, or something in between, we leave to the reader to decide. But if you ever find yourself in Black Hollow National Forest, if you ever feel the air turn unnaturally cold and sense something watching you from the darkness between the trees, remember Earl Whitmore, remember his warnings, and remember that in the eternal struggle between light and darkness, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply refuse to give in. The forest remains, as it has always remained. The trees grow tall and thick, their branches reaching toward a sky they will never touch. The trails wind through the wilderness, inviting hikers and campers and photographers to explore their beauty. And in the heart of the maw, in that place where even the light fears to go, the creatures wait. They are patient, as they have always been patient. They know that someday, someone else will wander into their domain, will hear their creaking voices calling from the shadows, will become the next addition to their ancient collection. They do not mind the waiting. They have all the time in the world. Some nights, when the moon is dark and the wind is still, the rangers at Black Hollow report hearing strange sounds from deep within the forest. Creaking, clicking sounds, like old wood bending or bones being snapped. They dismiss it as the natural noises of the wilderness, the settling of trees, the movements of nocturnal animals. They do not know about Earl Whitmore, about the creatures he fought and the darkness he faced. They do not know that the forest remembers, always remembers, and that it is only a matter of time before the next chapter of this terrible story begins. Perhaps you will be the one to write it. Perhaps you will be the next to hear your name being called from the darkness, to feel those hungry eyes watching your every move, to face the choice that Earl Whitmore faced so many years ago. If that day comes, remember his words, remember his warnings, and remember that no matter how dark the night may seem, the light is always there, waiting for those brave enough to seek it. This is the story of the vanishing at Black Hollow National Forest. This is the story of Earl Whitmore and the creatures that haunted his life and his death. This is a story of darkness and light, of horror and hope, of the thin line between the world we know and the mysteries that lie beyond. It is not a story with a happy ending because some stories do not have happy endings. But it is a story that needed to be told, a warning that needed to be given, a truth that needed to be spoken even if no one believes it. The forest is waiting. The creatures are watching. And somewhere, in the darkness between the trees, the hungry voices are still calling. Earl Whitmore, they whisper. Earl Whitmore, we remember you. And they always will. The reports kept coming in the months and years after Earl's death. Hikers who claimed to have seen tall, thin figures moving through the trees at dusk. Campers who woke in the night to find strange footprints circling their tents. Rangers who heard their names being called from parts of the forest where no one should have been. Each incident was explained away, attributed to overactive imaginations, tricks of the light, the natural eeriness of an ancient forest. But those who experienced these things knew the truth, felt it in their bones in the same way Earl Whitmore had felt it. Something was watching them from the darkness. Something was waiting. A young ranger named Thomas Mitchell joined the Black Hollow staff in the summer of 2019. He was fresh out of forestry school, eager and idealistic, much as Earl had been when he first arrived more than 50 years earlier. The older rangers took him under their wing, teaching him the trails and the procedures, showing him how to survive in the wilderness. But there was one thing they did not teach him, one subject that was never discussed around the campfires or during the long night shifts. They did not tell him about Earl Whitmore. They did not tell him about the creatures. Do not answer if you hear your name being called from deep within the forest. And if you find yourself facing the creatures, if you see those bark-like bodies and broken glass teeth, remember that they can be hurt, can be driven back, can be fought, even if they cannot be destroyed. Fire is their weakness, their one vulnerability, and a lit match or a burning brand may be enough to save your life. But most importantly, remember that you are human, that your life, however brief, has meaning and value that the creatures can never truly understand. They may be eternal, but they are empty, hollow things that exist only to consume. We are more than that. We love and hope and dream. We create beauty and meaning from the chaos of existence. We are fragile and fleeting, yes, but that very fragility makes us precious, makes each moment of our lives something to be treasured. I do not know what will become of Black Hollow in the years to come. Perhaps the Forest Service will eventually close it permanently, recognizing the danger even if they do not understand its source. Perhaps some future generation will discover a way to truly destroy the creatures, to end their existence once and for all. Or perhaps they will continue as they have for millennia, feeding and collecting and waiting in the darkness for the next unwary traveler. Whatever happens, I hope this account will survive, will find its way to someone who needs to hear its message. The world is full of darkness, but it is also full of light. Hold on to that light, cherish it, and never let the shadows claim it. That is the best any of us can do. My name is Earl Whitmore. I was a ranger at Black Hollow National Forest for 23 years. I saw things in those woods that still haunt my dreams. And now, as I face my final days, I pass this knowledge on to you, whoever you are, wherever you might be. Be careful, be vigilant, and never, ever forget that the forest is watching, always watching, with hungry eyes and infinite patience. The creatures of Black Hollow are waiting. They will always be waiting. The night my story truly ended began much as the night my story truly began, with the air turning unnaturally cold and the forest holding its breath. I was alone in my room at the hospice facility, the machines monitoring my failing body, humming softly in the darkness. The cancer had done its work, and I knew I had only days, perhaps hours, remaining. I had said my goodbyes to my children and grandchildren, had put my affairs in order, and was ready to face whatever came next. But as I lay there, drifting between wakefulness and sleep, I became aware of a presence in the room. The familiar creaking sound filled the air, soft at first, but growing louder, and I opened my eyes to find the large creature standing at the foot of my bed. It should not have been there, should not have been able to exist so far from its forest home, but there it stood, as real and terrible as it had ever been. It smiled that broken glass smile and spoke my name one final time. Earl Whitmore, it creaked. The time has come. I asked if it had come to take me, to add my soul to its collection now that my body had failed. The creature shook its head, a gesture that looked almost human. No, it said. You made your choice, and we honor it. We have come to offer you something else. A gift, if you will accept it. I asked what gift a creature of darkness could possibly offer a dying man. The creature's expression shifted, becoming something I had never seen on its features before, something almost like compassion. Closure, it said. Understanding. The chance to see what waits beyond before you cross the threshold yourself. The creature touched my forehead with one of its long, cold fingers, and suddenly I was somewhere else, somewhere beyond the hospice room and the machines and my failing body. I was in a place of light, pure and warm and welcoming, and I saw faces I recognized, faces of people I had loved and lost over the long years of my life. Dorothy was there, young and beautiful as she had been when we first met. Her smile as radiant as I remembered. My parents were there, and my grandparents, and friends who had passed on before me. They welcomed me with open arms, and I understood that this was not the end, but a beginning, a transition to something greater than I could have imagined. The creature's voice echoed in my mind. This is what waits for you, Earl Whitmore. This is what you chose when you refused our offer. You gave up eternity with us for this brief glimpse of light, and we want you to know that it was the right choice. Go now, join those who love you, and know that we will remember you. We'll speak your name in the darkness for as long as we exist. You were a worthy adversary, a rare human who saw us truly and did not break. That is something we respect, even honor. I returned to my body, to the hospice room and the machines and the pain that had become my constant companion. The creature was gone, if it had ever truly been there, but the vision remained, seared into my memory like a brand. I knew then that I was ready, truly ready to let go. The darkness had shown me the light, and in doing so had given me the peace I had sought for so long. I closed my eyes, took one final breath, and stepped forward into the warmth. This account was found among the personal effects of Earl Whitmore following his death on March 15, 2018. It was written in his own hand, in a notebook that showed signs of considerable age and wear. His family chose to make it public, honoring what they believed were his final wishes. Whether the events described within are true, the product of a dying mind, or something in between, we leave to the reader to decide. But if you ever find yourself in Black Hollow National Forest, if you ever feel the air turn unnaturally cold and sense something watching you from the darkness between the trees, remember Earl Whitmore. Remember his warnings, and remember that in the eternal struggle between light and darkness, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply refuse to give in. The forest remains, as it has always remained. The trees grow tall and thick, their branches reaching toward a sky they will never touch. The trails wind through the wilderness, inviting hikers and campers and photographers to explore their beauty. And in the heart of the maw, in that place where even the light fears to go, the creatures wait. They are patient, as they have always been patient. They know that someday, someone else will wander into their domain, will hear their creaking voices calling from the shadows, will become the next addition to their ancient collection. They do not mind the waiting. They have all the time in the world. Some nights, when the moon is dark and the wind is still, the rangers at Black Hollow report hearing strange sounds from deep within the forest, creaking, clicking sounds like old wood bending or bones being snapped. They dismiss it as the natural noises of the wilderness, the settling of trees, the movements of nocturnal animals. They do not know about Earl Whitmore, about the creatures he fought and the darkness he faced. They do not know that the forest remembers, always remembers, and that it is only a matter of time before the next chapter of this terrible story begins. Perhaps you will be the one to write it. Perhaps you will be the next to hear your name being called from the darkness, to feel those hungry eyes watching your every move, to face the choice that Earl Whitmore faced so many years ago. If that day comes, remember his words, remember his warnings, and remember that no matter how dark the night may seem, the light is always there, waiting for those brave enough to seek it. This is the story of the vanishing at Black Hollow National Forest. This is the story of Earl Whitmore and the creatures that haunted his life and his death. This is a story of darkness and light, of horror and hope, of the thin line between the world we know and the mysteries that lie beyond. It is not a story with a happy ending, because some stories do not have happy endings. But it is a story that needed to be told, a warning that needed to be given, a truth that needed to be spoken even if no one believes it. The forest is waiting. The creatures are watching. And somewhere in the darkness between the trees, the hungry voices are still calling. Earl Whitmore, they whisper. Earl Whitmore, we remember you, and they always will. The reports kept coming in the months and years after Earl's death. Hikers who claimed to have seen tall, thin figures moving through the trees at dusk. Campers who woke in the night to find strange footprints circling their tents. Rangers who heard their names being called from parts of the forest where no one should have been. Each incident was explained away, attributed to overactive imaginations, tricks of the light, the natural eeriness of an ancient forest. But those who experienced these things knew the truth, felt it in their bones in the same way Earl Whitmore had felt it. Something was watching them from the darkness. Something was waiting. A young ranger named Thomas Mitchell joined the Black Hollow staff in the summer of 2019. He was fresh out of forestry school, eager and idealistic, much as Earl had been when he first arrived more than 50 years earlier. The older rangers took him under their wing, teaching him the trails and the procedures, showing him how to survive in the wilderness. But there was one thing they did not teach him, one subject that was never discussed around the campfires or during the long night shifts. They did not tell him about Earl Whitmore. They did not tell him about the creatures. They did not tell him about the disappearances that had plagued Black Hollow for centuries, the bodies that were never found, the screams that echoed through the darkness and then fell silent forever. Perhaps they thought they were protecting him. Perhaps they simply did not want to admit, even to themselves, that the stories might be true. Thomas found Earl's account by accident, stumbling across a copy in the back room of the ranger station where old records were stored. He read it in a single sitting, his coffee growing cold beside him, his hands trembling as he turned the pages. When he finished, he sat in silence for a long time, staring out the window at the forest that surrounded the station on all sides. The trees seemed darker now, more menacing, their branches reaching toward him like grasping hands. He knew, in that moment, that his life had changed forever. He could not unread what he had read, could not unsee the images that Earl's words had planted in his mind. The forest was no longer simply a place of beauty and peace. It was a hunting ground, and he was prey. Thomas became obsessed with the creatures, spending every free moment researching the history of Black Hollow, interviewing old-timers who remembered the disappearances of 1987, searching for any evidence that might prove or disprove Earl's claims. What he found only deepened his conviction that the old ranger had been telling the truth. The patterns were too consistent, too precise to be coincidence. Every few decades, clusters of disappearances, always in the remote sections of the forest, always without bodies or conclusive explanations. And always, the reports of strange sounds and stranger sightings that preceded and followed the events. Thomas brought his findings to the station chief, a practical woman named Barbara Donovan who had run Black Hollow for 15 years. She listened patiently as he laid out his evidence, nodded at appropriate moments, and when he finished, told him in a tone that brooked no argument to forget everything he had read. Earl Whitmore was a troubled man, she said. His account was the product of trauma and mental illness, nothing more. The disappearances had natural explanations, even if those explanations were never found. And the creatures, the Hollow Walkers or Forest Fiends or whatever name the old stories gave them, they did not exist. They were fairy tales, ghost stories told to frighten children and gullible tourists. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to show her the evidence that was right there in front of her if only she would open her eyes. But he saw the fear behind her certainty, the desperate need to believe that the world was rational and safe. He said nothing more. Some truths are too terrible to force on those who are not ready to receive them. The summer of 2019 was unusually quiet at Black Hollow. The trails were crowded with visitors, the campgrounds full, the station busy with 1,000 small tasks that kept a national forest running. Thomas threw himself into his work, trying to push the creatures from his mind, trying to convince himself that Barbara was right and Earl's account was nothing but the ramblings of a broken man. He almost succeeded. Almost. Then came the night of August 23rd, and everything changed. It began with a report from a group of campers near Whispering Falls, the same site where Eugene Cooper had been taken more than 30 years before. They claimed to have heard strange noises in the night, creaking and clicking sounds that seemed to come from all directions at once. They claimed to have seen shapes moving between the trees, tall and thin and impossibly fast. They packed up their camp before dawn and fled to the ranger station, their faces pale and their hands shaking. Thomas took their statements while Barbara dismissed their claims as the result of too much whiskey and too little sleep. But Thomas saw the terror in their eyes, recognized it as the same terror Earl had described in his account. These people had seen something in the forest, something that should not exist, and whatever it was waking up. More reports came in over the following weeks. A solo hiker on the Ridgeback Trail who claimed someone or something had followed him for miles, always staying just out of sight. A family who found strange footprints around their tent, prints that showed long, thin toes and were far too large to be human. A photographer who captured an image that she insisted showed a figure standing between the trees, tall and dark and watching the camera with eyes that gleamed in the reflected flash. The image was blurry, inconclusive, but Thomas studied it for hours, comparing it to the descriptions in Earl's account. The resemblance was unmistakable. The creatures were awake, and they were hunting. Thomas knew he had to act. He could not sit by and wait for the next disappearance, could not pretend that everything was normal while people were in danger. He began spending his off-duty hours in the forest, walking the remote trails, watching for signs of the creature's presence. He carried Earl's lighter with him, the silver lighter that had been returned to the station after the old ranger's death, along with a pack full of emergency flares and fire-starting equipment. If the creatures feared fire, as Earl had claimed, then Thomas would bring fire to them. He would not be a passive victim, would not wait for them to come for him. he would take the fight to them. On the night of September 15th, Thomas entered the maw. The forest closed around him like a living thing, branches reaching for his clothes, roots rising to trip his feet, shadows pressing in from all sides. He moved slowly, carefully, his flashlight beam cutting a weak path through the darkness. The air grew colder as he penetrated deeper into the forest, his breath forming clouds of mist that hung in the still air like ghosts. He could feel the creatures watching him, could sense their presence surrounding him on all sides. They were not attacking, not yet. They were curious, perhaps, wondering why this young ranger had dared to enter their domain. Thomas found the clearing where Earl had confronted the creatures 30 years before. The new growth that had covered it was gone now, replaced by bare earth and the remnants of what looked disturbingly like a nest. It was smaller than the one Earl had described, not yet fully formed. But the structure was unmistakable, branches and bones and other things woven together into a mound, a monument to death that was slowly being rebuilt. The creatures were preparing for another harvest. They emerged from the forest as Thomas stood there, dozens of tall, thin figures surrounding the clearing on all sides. Their bark-like skin seemed to absorb the light from his flashlight, making them difficult to see even when looking directly at them. Their two large eyes gleamed with hunger and intelligence, watching him with the patient attention of predators sizing up their prey. The largest of them stepped forward, and Thomas recognized it immediately. It was the same creature Earl had described, unchanged by the passage of decades, its broken glass smile as terrible as it had ever been. Thomas Mitchell. It creaked, its voice the sound of the forest itself speaking. Another watcher, come to our domain. How interesting. Thomas did not respond. He reached into his pack, pulled out a flare, and struck it against the igniter. The bright red light illuminated the clearing, casting long shadows across the gathered creatures. They recoiled slightly, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something that might have been concern. Fire, the large creature said. Always fire with your kind. Do you think to burn us as the old one did? Thomas shook his head. He held up Earl's lighter in his other hand and spoke for the first time. I am not here to burn you, he said. I am here to understand you. I read Earl Whitmore's account. I know what you are, what you do, but there are things he could not explain, questions he never answered. I want those answers. The creature tilted its head, studying Thomas with renewed interest. And if we do not wish to give you these answers? Then I will burn this place to the ground, Thomas said. I will burn the maw and everything in it, and I will keep burning until there is nothing left of you but ash and memory. The creature was silent for a long moment. Then it made a sound that might have been laughter, a creaking, clicking noise that echoed through the forest. You have courage, Thomas Mitchell. More courage than sense, perhaps. Very well. Ask your questions. We will answer what we choose to answer. Thomas asked about the disappearances, about why the creatures took human victims and what happened to them afterward. The creature explained that human consciousness was a delicacy to them, a source of nourishment that went beyond mere physical sustenance. By absorbing a human's memories and experiences, the creatures gained understanding of a world they could never otherwise know. Each victim became a window into humanity, a lens through which they could observe the strange, brief lives of these fragile beings. The bodies were consumed, yes, but the essence, the soul if you wish to call it that, lived on within the collective. Thomas asked about the cycles of disappearances, about why they occurred in clusters separated by decades of quiet. The creature explained that they were not the only beings of their kind, that similar colonies existed in wild places throughout the world. They communicated across vast distances, sharing knowledge and coordinating their hunts to avoid attracting too much attention. A few disappearances here, a few there, spread out over decades and continents, were far less likely to draw investigation than a concentrated feeding. They had survived for millennia by being cautious, by understanding the limitations of human attention and memory. Thomas asked about their origins, about how such creatures could exist in a world governed by natural laws. The creature's answer was cryptic. We are as natural as the trees that shelter us, it said. We evolved alongside your kind, two branches of the same ancient tree of life. But where you grew toward the light, we grew toward the darkness. Where you learned to build and create, we learned to hunt and consume. We are what your scientists would call an apex predator, the final evolution of a lineage that has existed since before your ancestors crawled from the ocean. We are not supernatural, Thomas Mitchell. We are simply different. The conversation continued for hours, the creature answering some questions fully and evading others entirely. Thomas learned things that no human had ever known, secrets that had been guarded for centuries. He learned that the creatures did not hate humanity, did not take pleasure in the suffering they caused. They were simply fulfilling their nature, doing what evolution had designed them to do. In their own way, they respected their victims, honoring the memories they absorbed and preserving them for eternity within the collective consciousness. As dawn approached, the creature made Thomas an offer similar to the one it had made Earl so many years before. "Join us," it said, "not as prey, but as observer. You seek understanding, and we can give it to you. Walk among us, learn from us, and in return, share with us the knowledge of your kind. You would be the first human to do so willingly, a bridge between our peoples." Thomas considered the offer. The scientist in him was fascinated by the possibility, by the chance to study these creatures from within their own society. But he thought of Earl's account, of the old ranger's decision to refuse and return to the human world. He thought of his own life, of his family and friends, of the simple pleasures that made existence worthwhile, and he knew that he could not accept. "I am honored by the offer," he said, "but I cannot take it. I am human, for better or worse, and I must remain so." The creature nodded, as if it had expected this answer. "Then go," it said. "Return to your world and your people. But know that you are always welcome here, Thomas Mitchell. You have seen us truly, and that makes you part of us, whether you accept it or not. We will not hunt you, will not harm you, but we will always be watching." Thomas left the maw as the sun rose over the mountains, his mind reeling from everything he had learned. He did not tell Barbara or the other rangers about his experience. He knew they would not believe him, would think he had lost his mind just as they thought Earl had lost his. Instead, he continued his work at Black Hollow, watching and waiting and recording everything he observed. The creatures kept their word, leaving him alone as he patrolled the trails and maintained the station. But he saw them sometimes, glimpses of tall, thin figures moving through the trees at dusk, eyes that gleamed in the darkness beyond his flashlight beam. They were there, always there, watching and waiting. The years passed. Thomas rose through the ranks, eventually becoming station chief when Barbara retired. He trained new rangers, taught them the trails and procedures, shared with them the knowledge that had been passed down through generations of Black Hollow staff. But he also shared something else, passing on Earl's account to those he trusted, those he believed were ready to hear the truth. Some dismissed it as he had expected, others listened and believed. And a few, a precious few, chose to learn more, to walk the maw as Thomas had walked it, to meet the creatures and speak with them as he had spoken. A strange community grew around Black Hollow, a secret society of rangers who knew the truth and had made their peace with it. They did not try to destroy the creatures or drive them away. They simply watched and waited, maintaining a delicate balance between human interests and the needs of beings far older and more powerful than themselves. It was not an ideal solution, but it was a solution, a way of coexisting with a darkness that could not be eliminated. Thomas is an old man now, retired from the Forest Service but never truly away from Black Hollow. He returns every autumn, walking the trails he knows so well, visiting the maw and speaking with the creatures who have become, in their own strange way, something almost like friends. He has added his own account to Earl's, filling in the gaps, explaining what the old ranger could not have known. Together, their words form a record of one of the world's oldest and most terrible secrets, a warning and a guide for those who might someday follow in their footsteps. The creatures continue their hunts, taking victims when their hunger grows too great to ignore. But they are more careful now, more selective, choosing those who will not be missed, those whose disappearances can be explained away by natural causes. The balance holds, fragile but intact. How long it will last, Thomas cannot say. Perhaps centuries more, perhaps only years. The world is changing, the wild place is shrinking, and someday there may be nowhere left for the creatures to hide. When that day comes, the balance will break, and humanity will be forced to confront a truth it has denied for millennia. Thomas hopes he will not live to see that day. He hopes that some future generation will find a better way, a true peace between species that have been predator and prey since the beginning of time. But he is not optimistic. He has seen too much, knows too much, to believe in happy endings. This account was found among the personal effects of Thomas Mitchell, discovered after his death in the autumn of 2047. It was written in his own hand, in a notebook that also contained decades of observations and records related to Black Hollow National Forest. His instructions were clear. The account was to be published, shared with the world, allowed to find its own audience. Whether people believe it or dismiss it as fiction is beyond his control or concern. The truth is the truth, regardless of who accepts it. The forest remains. The trails wind through the wilderness, inviting visitors to explore their beauty. The creatures watch from the darkness, patient and eternal, waiting for the next chapter of this endless story. And somewhere, in the heart of the maw, the nest grows larger, preparing for a harvest that may come tomorrow or may come in 100 years. Time means nothing to the creatures. They have all the time in the world. If you ever find yourself in Black Hollow National Forest, remember Earl Whitmore, remember Thomas Mitchell, remember their warnings and their wisdom. The forest is beautiful, yes, but it is also dangerous in ways that go beyond anything the official guidebooks describe. Stay on the trails, travel with companions. Do not wander into the remote sections alone, especially after dark. And if you hear someone calling your name from deep within the trees, do not answer. Do not investigate. Do not try to find the source. Simply turn around and walk away as quickly as you can. The creatures are watching. They are always watching, and they are always hungry. Some years ago, a young woman named Sarah Chen arrived at Black Hollow as a summer intern. She was studying biology at Stanford, brilliant and ambitious, with a particular interest in cryptozoology and unexplained phenomena. She had heard rumors about Black Hollow, whispers about disappearances that defied explanation and creatures that lurked in the forest depths. She came seeking answers, determined to prove or disprove the legends once and for all. Thomas was station chief at the time. He recognized something in Sarah, a combination of intelligence and open-mindedness that reminded him of himself at that age. He gave her Earl's account to read, watched as her skepticism slowly transformed into belief, and eventually took her to the maw to meet the creatures herself. Sarah's reaction was different from what Thomas had expected. She was not afraid, not exactly. She was fascinated, her scientific mind racing to understand beings that seemed to violate every principle of biology and evolution she had ever learned. She asked questions that neither Thomas nor Earl had thought to ask, probed areas of the creature's existence that had never been explored. And the creatures, for their part, seemed equally fascinated by her, this young human who approached them with curiosity rather than fear. Sarah spent 3 summers at Black Hollow, returning each year to continue her research. She developed a rapport with the creatures that went beyond anything Thomas had achieved, spending hours in conversation with them, learning their language and their history. She documented everything, filling notebook after notebook with observations and theories. Her goal, she told Thomas, was to eventually publish her findings, to introduce the world to a form of life that had remained hidden for millennia. Thomas tried to warn her about the dangers of such exposure, about how the creatures had survived precisely because they remained secret. But Sarah was determined, convinced that knowledge was always better than ignorance, that humanity had a right to know the truth about the world they lived in. The creatures disagreed. On the night before Sarah was supposed to return to Stanford with her research, they came for her. Thomas found her tent empty the next morning, her notebooks scattered across the ground, a few drops of blood staining the fabric. He searched for weeks, calling in every favor, using every resource at his disposal. He found nothing. Sarah Chen had vanished, just as Harold Jennings had vanished, just as Eugene Cooper had vanished, just as countless others had vanished over the centuries. She had learned too much, pushed too far, and the creatures had responded in the only way they knew how. Thomas never forgave himself for introducing Sarah to the creatures. He never forgave himself for believing that the balance could be maintained, that humans and creatures could coexist in mutual understanding. The creatures were predators, ultimately and irreducibly. They might have patience, might have intelligence, might even have something approaching respect for their prey. But they would always be predators, and humans would always be prey. The balance he had believed in was nothing but a comfortable illusion, a story he told himself to avoid facing the terrible truth. After Sarah's disappearance, Thomas stopped visiting the maw. He continued his work at Black Hollow, continued training new rangers and maintaining the trails, but he no longer sought out the creatures or attempted to communicate with them. He had learned his lesson. Some things were not meant to be understood. Some truths were too terrible to pursue. The creatures, for their part, seemed content to let him go. They did not seek him out, did not appear to him during his patrols. It was as if Sarah's death had been a message, a reminder of the natural order that governed their relationship. Thomas had forgotten his place, had started to think of the creatures as something other than what they were. Sarah's fate was a correction, a reassertion of the fundamental reality that separated their kinds, predator and prey, hunter and hunted. Some bonds could not be broken. Thomas included Sarah's story in his account, wanting her memory to survive even if her body never would. She deserved to be remembered, this brilliant young woman who had pursued knowledge into the heart of darkness and paid the ultimate price. Her notebooks were never recovered, her research lost forever, but her spirit lives on in these pages, a warning to future seekers who might be tempted to follow in her footsteps. Knowledge has costs, understanding has limits, and some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. The account you have read is complete now, the story of Black Hollow told as fully as it can be told by those who have lived it. Earl Whitmore and Thomas Mitchell, two men separated by generations, but united by their encounters with something beyond human understanding. Sarah Chen, whose quest for knowledge ended in tragedy, and countless others, named and unnamed, who entered the forest and never returned. Their stories are part of Black Hollow now, woven into the very fabric of the place like the branches and bones of the creature's nest. If you choose to visit Black Hollow, you will find a beautiful forest, ancient and wild and seemingly peaceful. The trails are well maintained, the campgrounds clean and welcoming. The rangers are friendly, the views spectacular, the wildlife abundant. On the surface, there is nothing to suggest that this place harbors darkness, that something waits in the depths of the forest with hungry eyes and infinite patience. But beneath the surface, in the places where the light does not reach, the truth remains. The creatures are there, as they have always been there. They are watching, as they have always been watching. And they are waiting, as they have always been waiting, for the next unwary traveler who strays too far from the marked paths. This is the story of the vanishing at Black Hollow National Forest. This is the truth that has been hidden for centuries, finally revealed to a world that may or may not be ready to receive it. What you do with this knowledge is your choice. You can dismiss it as fiction, the ramblings of disturbed minds. You can believe it and take its warnings to heart, or you can seek out the creatures yourself, walk into the maw as Earl and Thomas and Sarah did, and discover firsthand the reality that lurks behind the legend. Whatever you choose, remember this. The forest is watching. It has always been watching, and it will continue to watch long after you and I and everyone we know has turned to dust. The creatures are eternal, patient beyond human comprehension, and their hunger never truly fades. They are part of this world, as much as the mountains and rivers and stars. They were here before us, and they will be here after us. The only question is, how many more will vanish into their embrace before the story finally ends? Earl Whitmore knew this. Thomas Mitchell knew this. Sarah Chen learned it too late, and now you know it too. The forest awaits.